Being an executor for a loved one who's recently died can be a difficult task at an already stressful time, but you can learn lessons from those who have already taken on the role. Welcome to Which Money. Hello, it's James Rowe in the Which studio, and I'm pleased to say alongside me I've got one of our researchers here at Which, Holly Lanyon. Holly, hello.
Hi, James.
How are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you.
Very good. And joining us down the line, we've got from our legal team, James Buchan. James, hello.
Hello, James. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. I'm going to kick off with you, James, actually, because we're talking about being an executor for somebody. And I wonder if it might just be nice for you to kick off just with a bit of an overview about what that role actually is. And, I mean, it does seem like a long list, but some of the responsibilities that might come with that role.
I think when people ask me about being an executor and whether it's something they should do, I always liken it to moving home. So if you're moving house, what do you need to do when you move house? Everything that's involved and all of the jobs and tasks that you have to do, that is in effect a very similar thing that you're doing, but you've also got to factor in the fact that you've got a loved one that has died, and so you've got an emotional and a very stressful time attached to that as well. It's not just in terms of dealing with the home. You've also got to deal with bank accounts, any investment shares. They might own a business. They might have complications in terms of they might have a complicated family situation. So it's something you really need to think about before you say yes to being an executor. And even if you are appointed, you still do have time to kind of pause and think if it is still something that you want to do.
And there's all those complications around the money and that kind of thing. But it's also just the emotional stuff as well, isn't it? You know, going through their possessions, some of which you might not have seen for a very long time. And,
that's right.
And organising the funeral as well. You know, it's almost like the emotional baggage that goes along with it as well, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And I think that you are generally in a heightened state anyway when somebody has died. You're emotional. To then have to potentially be on the phone to a bank for a while and speaking to somebody who's not quite understanding what you're saying, and then, like you said, you've got the having to go through the home and look at personal possessions, and it can be a very, very difficult, very emotional time.
And there's two options, isn't there, for being an executor? You can appoint a solicitor who can almost guide you through that process. There's a DIY route as well, though, isn't there?
There is. So I think before you decide whether or not you want to act, you have three options. So you can be an executor, you can act, you can take on the role, or you can do something called renouncing, which means you say, no, I'm not doing this, thanks very much, I'm having nothing to do with this, and you step away. Or there's like a hybrid role called acting with power reserved, and that basically means you kind of sit on the sidelines, but if you need to get involved later on down the line, you can get involved. And it's important to remember that once you start being executor, you can't then stop. So it's something called intermeddling, which sounds like a bit like a nosy neighbour. Once you kind of start being an executor, holding yourself out, you can't then say, yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore. You're kind of there, if that makes sense. But you're right. So you can do it yourself. You can do everything by yourself, and you can make sure you deal with everything, or you can employ a solicitor to do the job for you. A lot of solicitors will also offer a kind of hybrid where they will do certain bits and you can do certain bits, which can then help keep your costs down.
And Holly, to come to you, the reason why we're talking about this is because you wrote about this for the latest Money magazine, and you've been speaking to Which members who have been an executor before, and more than I thought went that DIY route, didn't he?
Yeah, so we surveyed Which members who'd been named as an executor in someone's will in the past 5 years, and 2/3 of those said they chose the DIY route.
And was it surprising to you? I'll come to you as well, James, on those stats. But for you, when you were doing that research, was it surprising that so many people went the DIY route? Because for me, I just feel like it'll be such an overwhelming task that I just want a bit of support.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a kind of key distinction to make is maybe James can chat about this a bit later as well, is between kind of simple estates and more complicated situations. And I think the kind of message I heard from people who administered a simple estate is it is a lot of work, it is very emotional, and it's a learning curve. But with some organisation, being happy to do some research, being happy to ask for help, it was manageable. And what surprised me actually was the amount of people who said, I found that interesting, or I learnt a lot, or I got a sense of kind of emotional closure through doing it.
What do you think on those stats, James, when so many of them, 2/3 of those who Holly spoke to, went that DIY route?
I'm not surprised. I think years ago, about 10 years ago, the vast majority of people, you would have found that would probably be skewed in the opposite way. So you would have probably, the vast majority of people would have used a professional service to help them. But I think recently, particularly the last 10 years, last 5 years, people have started to undertake more executorship work themselves, even more complex things or more high value things. They've started to undertake the role in their own right, as opposed to employing somebody to help them with it, which is the system has been made slightly easier. It's a more of an online process now, and like Holly was saying, with more straightforward estates, you don't have as much form filling and those sorts of things to complete. But I think it's always really important to remember, if you are an executor, that if you get things wrong, there can be a personal liability to you as an individual if you get something wrong. And if you report incorrect information to HMRC, you can have a quite hefty fine or a penalty potentially. So it's a bit like you don't know what you don't know. If my electrics go in my house, I'm not going to try and do it myself, because I'll probably kill myself because I don't know what I'm doing. And it's a bit like being an executor as well. It's really important to understand what you're doing and what you're entering into. If you're not sure, then go and get some help just for that bit. If you're not sure it's a taxable estate, go and see somebody and ask questions just about that, and pay for that little bit of help and support to make sure you are doing it in the right way. And then when they set you on the right path, you then kind of know which way and the direction that you're going in. But I would say just be careful and don't just blindly carry on thinking you know everything that what you're doing, because you may find actually that there's things that you're not doing that you should be doing, and it could land you in hot water later on down the line.
And when we talk about responsibilities of making sure everything's organised, does this come in two parts? Does it come in the first part for the deceased, so beforehand making sure everything is as organised as possible? But then I guess there's also some sort of responsibility to be organised for the executor themselves as well, right?
Yeah, I completely. I mean, it's really easy to be organised, and that sounds like a really simple thing to say, but you know there's lots of estates I've dealt with where it's absolute chaos and carnage, and you don't have a clue because the person hasn't organised themselves in a very good way. But I'm not saying you need to have everything in one envelope and have everything written down and being able to pass on, but it does make things easier for the executor if they know where everything is, or if you've got an item that you particularly want passing to somebody, they know whereabouts said item is, or they know where your bank accounts are, or who your home insurance is with, and all those sort of things. So the more that the more information that you're able to provide your executor with when the time arises, that does make it an awful lot easier for the executor to deal with the estate.
Just to echo what James was saying, that was something that, speaking to members, really came across. They were like, going through this process myself, I've now put myself in the shoes of my executor, and I really want to make sure that, all the information about my bank accounts is easily accessible, or, that they know where to find, at the least they know where to find my will and things like that. So for one of the members that we spoke to, she was an executor for a close friend. It was the first time she'd ever done it. And she said, was just completely overwhelmed by the situation. Like James was saying, that thing of you don't know what you don't know, you had to research at every stage, wanted to make sure she was getting it right. And it really prompted her to think about her own affairs. And now she's gone, I think, to some really amazing lengths to make sure that the role is as easy as possible for those that will be her executor when she dies. So she's coordinated a group of friends, having understood how much work it is to be an executor and how many different aspects there are. She's coordinated a group of friends who her executor will kind of be the team leader of. She's assigned roles based on their strengths and personalities. So somebody will be responsible for sorting all the kind of medical aspects to do with her death. Another friend has agreed to look after a dog. Another friend has agreed to instead of a funeral, she's going to have a party, so another friend's organised that. I was just really struck by the level of effort that she's gone to support those people after she's died. And she kind of said, this is a conversation that you've got to start really early, and all my friends kind of know that I'm a bit weird. I'm happy to talk about death. I want to normalise it. I just found it it was a really brilliant conversation. And something that she said, the grief, that's going to be up to the individual. I can't help with that, but I can help make being my executor less stressful.
Do you know, I was reading the piece and I've got it here as well. She's clearly in a very good position because she's got a former UN colleague who will register the death and arrange the cremation. Clearly somebody who's very organised themselves. And I also love that she's already got this group who you said, they've already got a WhatsApp group together. Yeah. So it's all very organised. Yeah. This, I guess, James, this is almost to like the extreme, but definitely in a good way, isn't it?
I think it is. I think like Holly said, I think some people are really reluctant to talk about this sort of thing. And I don't know if it's they think as soon as they start talking about it, the Grim Reaper's going to be knocking at the door and away they go. I think it's just people don't like to talk about dying and death and what happens when they're not here. And, and then you get the hyper organised that, they want to make sure it's easier for their loved ones and as easy as possible for them to deal with things. But I think it's really important, even if you give people the bare minimum of information, even if you say I'm not talking about it now, but I'll make sure I leave everything organised and the envelopes in the second drawer down at the top of the stairs or wherever it might be where you need to find everything. It does help. It does make things easier. But I think some people are quite open to talking about it, and I think it's quite refreshing. Actually, I think it's I don't think it's a morbid subject. I think it's just planning, and I think it can also help you get your affairs in order. Like if you don't have life insurance in place, if you don't have a funeral plan in place and those sort of things, it kind of prompts you to think about those things. So I think it can only be a positive thing really, but it just depends on the individual, I suppose, and their friends and their family circumstances as well.
James, going back to something else you said a little bit earlier on about the responsibility being on the executor to make sure everything is right, and this is to do with money and tax and making sure everything is paid on time. Do you think that rightfully almost scares some people because there's a lot of responsibility at their door to ensure perhaps vast large sums of money are dealt with in the right way?
Yeah, I think it does scare some people. And if I'm really honest, it probably should scare people because sometimes you are distributing properties, large sums of money. You're giving it to people who might be in another country, and you need to make sure that you're kind of dotting those I's and crossing the T's and making sure that when you send that money, you've made sure the person that it's going to is the right person that's entitled. You're sending it to the right accounts, that if you're transferring a property that it's been done in the right way. So I think it is frightening. It is a scary thing to have to do if you think you're in you might be pushing a button to send £200,000 or whatever it might be to somebody, to make sure actually that you've done your kind of due diligence, if you want to call it that, as an executor, to make sure that that money can be transferred to that person.
And Holly, something, again, you reported on, and it's something we've reported on at Which for a little while, is banks making things perhaps a little bit more difficult than it really should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So did an investigation last year, and done previous ones have been done at Which as well, looking at the probate process and the challenges people face when dealing with banks. I think in the most recent investigation, a fifth of people said they found that process difficult, and the same proportion were dissatisfied with their provider's skill and knowledge, had stories of lost documents, poor communication, delays. And similar things came up in this investigation again. So heard from members who said, the bank lost the death certificate and I had to submit a formal complaint and things like that. So there's also that aspect of, I think that member said it, I was happy to kind of complain to the bank and submit a complaint, but I understand that when you're stressed and you're grieving, that's a whole other additional thing to have on your plate that you shouldn't really have to deal with.
And I guess, speaking to other members who went down the solicitor route for a little bit of help, I guess that almost clears up some of the stress that you'd have to go through because you have somebody almost acting on your behalf to deal with these things that you really don't want to be dealing with at a really stressful time already. Yeah.
And I did hear from members exactly who said, especially for those emotional reasons, they were finding the process really overwhelming, and it was a big relief actually to be able to pass on that responsibility. So heard from one member who said, at every stage I was reminded of the person, and for that reason it was just really difficult, so I chose to enlist a solicitor. So I think it can be really, really helpful in that regard, yeah.
You say helpful in that regard, but just to pick out some more of the stats from your research, 59% of those who did appoint a solicitor did so because they thought that they didn't have the right skills as an executor themselves. But then equally, there was a lot of members who also pointed out the fact that they felt their solicitor didn't do everything the way they wanted them to be done and that kind of thing. So there was a bit of they were almost at odds with the solicitor as well.
Yeah, so on that first point, I guess it is generally advised in more complicated situations. So maybe if there's like assets held abroad or the estate's bankrupt or you expect that there might be disputes about the will, it is generally advised that you use a solicitor. So I think that speaks a bit to that stat where, 6 in 10 of those who did were thinking, well, this is probably something a bit more complicated than I'm able to take care of. And like James says, like, there is a lot of responsibility and a lot can go wrong. So it's important that you ask for help when you need it. But we did hear from those who used a solicitor that it didn't always make things easier. So I think those who used a solicitor were more likely to say they found the process difficult. So about 4 in 10 said they found the process difficult compared with 3 in 10 of those who did DOI. And there we had stories of, poor communication, or sometimes people saying that they felt like they had to continually chase for updates or noticing errors or things going wrong. So things still can go wrong when you work with a solicitor, but I think the crucial thing is to, when you're choosing someone, ask a lot of questions, make sure that you've really, like James was saying, if you've agreed a division of labour, make sure you're crystal clear about who's doing what. Have a conversation about costs at the outset to make sure there aren't surprises later on.
James, why do you think, as somebody who's worked in private practice before, why do you think so many people in Holly's research said that the process was, or they were more likely to say the process was more difficult using a solicitor?
It's one of those things where I think that with any profession, you get good and you get bad. And whether you're a solicitor, a builder, a shopkeeper, you get great people and you get not so great people. But I think that there's this, I think with solicitors, I think that the people kind of, when you're an executor and you employ a solicitor, there's an element of you're giving up control as well, which for some people is quite hard to deal with. And some solicitors are great at keeping their clients up to date and they keep them informed and the process and all those sorts of things, which they should do. But I think you've also got to factor in is the more your solicitor updates you, the more it's going to cost. If you're not working on a fixed fee basis, and the more you're sending emails and you're chasing, it's increasing your costs. So I think you've also got to factor in that if you're waiting for clearance, for example, from HMRC, which can take 6 months, and there's nothing happening, then you don't want to hear from your solicitor because it's just going to cost. You don't want a letter just saying there's nothing happening, we just thought we'd let you know, because that letter's going to cost you X amount of money. So I think it's you get great solicitors and you get bad solicitors, and I'm one, and I will openly say that that is the case. And you get some solicitors that are really good at updating their clients, some solicitors that aren't very good at updating their clients. But I think it's that lack of control and they're not knowing. So solicitors, for example, if they're distributing money, will do an anti-money laundering check. They'll do bankruptcy checks to make sure when they distribute the money, it's going to the right person and that they're not paying money to a bankrupt. Most people would say, well, why do you need to do an anti-money laundering check? It's like, well, if you knew what could happen if the money went to the wrong people, you'd understand why. But I think that on the part of that is solicitors not explaining why they do what they do. And it's the age-old, I mean, they never learn. It's the age-old thing that if you inform people and let them and explain why, that sometimes is enough to keep them happy. They don't mind what you're doing in a sense. It's that actually you're telling them why you're doing something or why you're not doing something, and that is usually what I always found was enough for people to think, oh, actually, yeah, you're doing a good job, thanks very much. So I think it's a two-way thing. I think it's expectation, like Holly said, set out everybody's expectation at the start and understand who's doing what. But I think explaining why things are being done and why things take a long time, is. Sometimes the revenue HMRC might take a long time to deal with something, and that's not a solicitor's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just that's how long it takes. But explain at the start. There's going to be a delay, we think, because of X. But I think it's a communication thing, and again, expectation and communication, which sometimes don't necessarily always meet. Sorry, that was a long way of going of saying that, wasn't it?
Thoroughly answered, nonetheless. Just to take a step back, you don't actually have to be an executor, do you? You can decline somebody's request, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally what happens is when you write your will, that's the moment when you appoint your executor. And what ideally would happen is that you chat with that person and you say, look, are you happy to take on this role? And that conversation, I think, is really important. And it's, don't just ask the person, have a conversation with them about your wishes, about what's in your will, about what the role will involve. And it's important to remember at that point you don't have to say yes. So I heard from a member who asked 2 friends to do it, and he sent them their will and they read it and they said, no, sorry, we don't want to do it. And his understanding was that actually his wishes, he thought, they might cause some upset further down the line. So he didn't want an attended funeral and he wanted to donate his organs if possible. And he was absolutely fine with that, his friend's decision. He said, no, I completely understand. If you don't have a conversation first and talk about it, it's like going to a job interview, saying, yes, I'll take the role, and then on day one finding out, what is it I'm actually doing? Yeah. So I think that conversation is like really, really important to make sure, again, that thing about expectations, that everyone understands what's involved. But like James was saying earlier, further down the line, if you are named as an executor in someone's will, and at the point that person's died, you still have the opportunity then to decide whether or not to take on the role, and hire a solicitor to help you, to formally renounce the role or reserve power. Is that right, James?
Yeah, that's right. As I said at the start, you can once the person has died, you can accept the role, be an executor. You can renounce, which means you say no thanks, bye, or you can act with power reserve, which means you sit on the sidelines. And kind of it's a kind of a hybrid really between. But yeah, I mean, I would always say to people, think very carefully before you agree to doing it, and think even more carefully when the person has died. You don't want to be in a situation where you've got beneficiaries at war and you're kind of in the middle, because it's you do get some very poorly behaved people, unfortunately, when it comes to someone's died, and that can be for various reasons, and you don't want to be kind of in the middle of all of that, because it is incredibly stressful and it can take an awful long time and be kind of part of your life for an awful long period. So think really carefully about it. If you think actually this is really complicated, or if somebody's put 100 legacies in their will, which some people do, unfortunately, sometimes, you think actually this is going to be a lot of work, and I'm working full time, I don't really have time for this. Or like I said, if you've got beneficiaries who there's clearly going to be a bit of an argument going on here, and you're kind of best, it's quite nice to watch the drama from a distance sometimes, but you don't necessarily always want to be in the middle of it. So yeah, it's really important. You've got choices, you've got options, and before you do anything, think about whether or not you want to carry on. Is kind of would always be my advice to people, because once you start, like Holly and I might have said previously, once you start doing it, you can't then back out, so you're kind of stuck with it, so to speak.
It's a really crucial point about the time involved, actually. That was something I found quite surprising. So we asked people about when they chose their executor, what were some of the important considerations, and only a quarter said that they have enough time to carry out the role. It was a relevant consideration, but like James has just said, it can take an incredibly long time, and you kind of need to understand from the outset the commitment that you're signing up to.
And there's loads of other, in the magazine piece, there's loads of other lessons learned by executors. I'm just going to pull one out here just because I don't actually know what it is and I'd love to know more. One executor says, the government's tell us once service is your friend. What's that?
Oh, yeah. I get really good, I hear loads of really good feedback about the government's tell us once service. So when someone dies, you need to notify lots of different providers of the death, and the government have set up a service where you can tell them once and it will notify. I'm not sure if every single kind of government department is on it, but a good set, so like DVLA, HMRC, and it means that it just saves you that admin of repeating that process, because you'll also need to be notifying their energy provider, their mobile and internet, and endless list, all of the banks that they ever held, that they have an account with. So that's a process that's been set up to make that administrative burden a little bit easier, and people say that it works very well.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. I didn't know what it was, and clearly it's a very good thing. I think we've learned loads there, and our money members will have learned probably even more in the magazine piece. But James, thanks for all of your brilliant advice, and sorry for sort of tarnishing all solicitors with one brush.
That's fine. I'm sure a lot worse has been said.
And Holly, thank you.
Thank you.